Thank you. It's so great to be here. And just a little clarification, I never want to leave the office of anything. That's not sort of my job. And so what I more want to do is to bridge silos. And so some of the work that I'm doing right now, and this is really relevant, is to know that there are good pockets of things being done in lots of places. But just like if you have an orchestra where everybody's a soloist, you don't really get the actual whole symphony until everybody's working together. And I often think at these big organizations like Penn and the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and Mayo, that unless we're actually thinking about how we can have synergy, we're not going to work together. So that's called the innovation ecosystem, and this is, you're all part of it. It just happens to be that we're working on it to start with at CHOP and Penn. So I'm actually going to talk about a slightly different way of training, because what is the reality is that people with some of the very, very, very best ideas are busy clinicians or scientists who have no time for any activity that you want to give them to. They don't have time to take a course. They don't have time to have a weekend session. They don't have time for a boot camp. They don't have time for anything, especially now during COVID. So what we're trying to do is, in addition to all those other activities, think about how you can infuse entrepreneurial training in the lives of clinicians. So I actually have disclosures, but nothing related to this. I currently have multiple sources of funding from NIH, NSF, and the like. And then as Nalika said, where the rubber meets the road, quote unquote, I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor and co-founder of Diagnostic Driving. So the learning objectives for this talk, at the end of the talk, I want those who are on this talk who are not busy clinicians, people who are actually creating educational curricula and delivering them, to really appreciate the value of clinician innovators and the fact that they really have very little time, just to really think about that, and then to start looking at just the very beginning of some of the formats we're trying. So why do we need clinician innovators? There was a paper that came out from an institution in California a couple of years ago about the idea of creating a new track for academic clinicians called clinician innovators. And I really believe in that, because the clinician, if they're very busy in the clinic and they have some specialized population, they have broad exposure to patients with a condition of some sort. They live, their lived experience is healthcare, and those two things get together really motivate them to say where the problems are. And so they can really define very clearly what the need is. What's the problem and what's it going to look like if it's better? They're good for idea generation, because very often they have to create a workaround. Busy nurses, for example, are often creating a way to deal with the bureaucratic systems that they're around to make it all work for them. So they're really good at idea generation. They're subject matter experts in certain areas in terms of what solution needs to have for it to be useful, disease processes and the rest. And then they're trained with a scientific approach about de-risking and validation. That's just that is what we are taught in medical school, and this was also in PhDs, this is what we're taught in graduate school, is this idea of putting forward a falsifiable hypothesis, and whether it's the diagnosis or the treatment plan, and then going from there. But the problem is that there are no incentives, particularly in academia. You're rewarded for patient care, for grants, for papers, for those types of things. And in fact, very little of this is ever going to see the light of day in terms of financial rewards. And if you're a junior in your career, an assistant professor, for example, you don't get credit for any of this. In terms of practice, it's about seeing more patients. So if you start doing entrepreneurial stuff and you're not seeing patients, then you're not going to have the RVUs. There are all these problems that people have, and I see someone over nodding quite a lot. It's really a problem. You also have almost no or limited training or exposure in medical school. I mean, I had endless courses in things like pharmacology that I don't ever use today, and all the rest of that. But the day-to-day needs of things that we use every day, like management, entrepreneurship, we have no training in medical school. I talked about the time demands. And then there's this self-perception. I literally just a week ago, someone who is high up in our organization said to me that, you know, Flora, what you do is an innovation. Innovation is like Tesla or gene therapy. And so I think that there is this perceived concept that innovation is in the hands of very few people who are doing some pie in the sky work that might end up being the mRNA vaccines, but oftentimes isn't. But that's innovation. But all this other stuff, which is creating new value, is not perceived as innovation, even though it truly is. And so a lot of these like-minded clinicians like I am really are, they shy away because they think I'm not a business person, I don't have a background, and it's not valued, and more importantly, it's not innovation. And they also have very little exposure to entrepreneurs. They think it's something that's really out there, like you gotta be in Silicon Valley or somewhere else to be able to do it, and you're not really in a shared space with clinicians. So what do they want? They want targeted coaching. They don't want a full curriculum, they don't want a boot camp. When they have a question, they want to be able to sit down with people and get the answer in a very, very concise way. Just like if you were getting a consult for a rash that they were seeing or a neurosurgeon. They want a community of people that they cannot feel so alone, and they want convenience. So what are some of the training needs? These are the top 10, and because of that, when you hear more about our book later, that we're all sharing with you and making it openly available, these are some of the things that came up of what they need. How to really define their problem so that they can go after it. How to de-risk an idea so they don't waste their time. Assessing the market, business plans, all these other things, creating a pitch deck. These are things that they have zero skill in doing from medical school that they really want to know more about. So I'm going to end with just 3, because I could give many, many, but one of them, as I talked about, was targeted coaching rather than a full curriculum. So here you might have 20-minute, 1-hour coaching sessions. People come to me about this, or office hours, like our Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation does, is to, people come and say, look, I've got a problem. And so they show up with the session, and in advance, I ask the clinician to send me their question and be prepared to really to learn and to do more on their own, okay? So it's not like I'm gonna just give them something, that whole thing is not to fish for them, but to teach them how to fish. So the goal is to provide them with answers to their question that they have answered. So they have answered it themselves because they have the tool. So the structure is to determine where the clinician is in their entrepreneurial journey, which I think is important. Is this just an idea? Do you already have a prototype? Do you have a team? Where are you? Determine the coaching need. Think of it as an educational objective. Then choose which of these 10 topics that we already have chapters for. Think about how that might be able to be useful, or create others as you start doing it. And that's what I keep doing. As I create another content, I create another chapter. And then provide just-in-time background, not any more than that you need to, but just a little bit so they know where it's coming from. Answer the question by applying the good entrepreneurship practice and show it to them, and leave them with resources to learn more. So a second one,
Maybe the cursor towards.
Okay, thank you so much. Another one is pre-COVID. It was called pizza parties. Everybody needs to eat, and it's not that expensive to order pizza. And so we would order a couple pizzas and invite busy clinicians to eat lunch and talk about entrepreneurship. And what we would do is, again, send questions in advance about what is the kind of training you would get while you eat your pizza, and what kinds of things do you want to talk about. And the goal was to provide group training for an individual clinician's question. So somebody would say they had a problem, and other people would say, yeah, that's my problem too. And it would be a supportive environment where other people are learning the language, learning it, making it fun, engaging, and doing it over lunch. The structure is we start off with an introduction where people talk about their entrepreneurial journey. So it's sort of norm setting, maybe share their ideas, think through it, 15 minutes of training, no more, so that it's interactive and fun. And the remaining time is for networking, and leave them again with resources. You'll see at the very end, I always leave people with resources so they can do more and invite them to the next thing. And then the last is convenience. Here is about this, something that I found has been the most useful. Almost all of us have these 1-hour meetings, whether they're department meetings, center meetings, other meetings, they really don't have to be an hour, right? They really could be 45 minutes, and so, but they always are an hour. And so if you come in and you say you've got a session to give people for 15 minutes, they're almost always happy to do it because they don't have enough for their agenda anyway. And so the organizer has to give you something in advance so that you make sure you're delivering something that's of importance to the attendees. And the goal of the session is to introduce an entrepreneurial topic, to get people in the door, get them in the door, and then you grow the community of innovators by collecting names. So the structure is 15-minute training that could be interactive, fun, leave them with resources, and invite them to a pizza party or invite them to office hours, whatever it might be able to do. It could be about IP, it could be working with your tech transfer office, it could be de-risking or giving a pitch. And the one that they often always love is how to give a pitch about themselves, for example. And so here's some quick training topics that could be delivered in those 15 minutes. One of them is how to do a good interview. Another is how to create personas, blue sky thinking. But I'm going to tell you about my favorite one, which is this idea of stupid answers. I'm not sure where it is on here, but it's the idea is to have people talk about what the worst idea is. Give them a problem and have them go around with the worst idea. It's really, really decompresses everybody, makes them laugh, whatever it might be. Like, how are we going to get people to take COVID vaccines? You know, there are all kinds of really funny ways that you can think about how people are going to get their COVID vaccines. I mean, and all of that. And so it's this idea of making it fun, helping them think through it, and leave them with a skill that makes them want to have more. So with that, I'm going to summarize and just say, we desperately need clinicians as our innovators. More and more what I've seen is happening with Epic and like is that we keep developing more and more products that are not for the clinician, not for the patient, they're really for billing. And so we need to really get this concept of the voice of the people at the front line amplified so that they can actually help us. But in order to do that, because of how busy they are, you need to be relevant and efficient. You need to give them colleagues and a sense of community and make it. So with that.
That's a really very innovative and fun way to engage with clinicians who, as you said, they know the ground truth of what's happening, and they can really share so many important insights.